So I'm going to be talking about GWT, which is Google Web Toolkit. So first of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to GDD India. It's the first time, and I hope many more to come. So let me ask this to start with. How many of you have used GWT or are familiar with GWT? Okay, very few. How many of you actually do web application development? Okay. So you'll be typically doing development using JavaScript, HTML, CSS, DOM. How many of you think that the technologies available right now with JavaScript, with HTML, CSS, it's the perfect development scenario or environment or the perfect development tools for you? Do you wish it could be better? Do you wish you had better debugging support or ID support to the tools? Do you think that would make you more productive? Okay, so that's where we figure GWT fits in. So let's see what GWT is. Now, what GWT allows you, at the core of GWT is an optimizing cross-compiler. This basically, as Prasad introduced in the keynote speech, this basically lets you write Java code in your favorite IDE. So you can use NetBeans, IntelliJ, Eclipse, JDeveloper, your favorite IDE with your favorite development tools, and you write Java UI code. You write your UI code in Java, which is very much like Swing. Have you used Swing? So you write your code, you design your UI using Swing, you write your HTTP request objects, you make your HTTP request and you get data. At the core of GWT is an optimizing cross-compiler that basically takes in your Java code and it generates JavaScript. It generates highly optimized JavaScript and obfuscated JavaScript, and it makes sure what it generates, it targets it for major browser platforms. So we see Opera, Internet Explorer, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Android. They're all supported with GWT cross-compiler. Okay. So here's the process. You write your code, you code against Java UI libraries. These are basically panels and buttons and the different widgets and the different DOM APIs available to you so that you can add widgets to your DOM model. So basically you're working in Java with these libraries, and the compiler translates the Java to highly optimized JS. So this is very important. The JS generated by the GWT compiler is highly optimized, and it targets all possible platforms, the major platforms. So we call it the technical advantage of GWT. Now we'll delve deeper into and we'll take a look at where do we get this advantage from. Okay, so before, I'll open up Eclipse for you and I'll show you how you create a GWT project and what is an anatomy of a GWT project, what all components do we have, how can we take advantage of the IDE support. But before that, let's take a high-level overview at GWT. So what you see in this slide is it's the client-side components and the server-side components that your application may typically have. So in the client-side components, the boxes in blue basically represent what GWT offers you. So we see there is a UI library component, there is JSNI. JSNI is something called JavaScript Native Interface. Now, GWT doesn't force you to write your applications from scratch. If you already have an existing applications, you could just plug in GWT. GWT doesn't say that you need to use all these modules. If you don't want to use internationalization, you're free to just use the UI libraries. If you don't want to use the RPC model, you're just free to use the UI client library. So JSNI is the interface that we provide to native JavaScript. You may have already developed your application over the years and may have some JavaScript libraries, and you would like to utilize the functionality that you've written over the years. So this is the interface to native code. Then we see two other components there called the GWT HTTP and the GWT RPC. The HTTP component basically allows you to make HTTP requests, which is your XML HTTP request object, the XHR underlying implementation. It allows you to talk to any non-Java server or Java server, as you would do in a normal application. You may have your request handlers handling your requests. So, but there is a component of GWT called the RPC, which is remote procedure calls. The GWT RPC basically allows you to write services on your Java side, and you extend a few the remote service interface of GWT, and you write your service classes in Java. What GWT then does is creates a proxy of the service class on the client. And what you can do is basically why it is advantageous is what you can do is define your data transfer objects as Java POJOs. So you don't basically go about writing XML, designing your schema or the transfer format over the wire. You just write Java objects, POJOs, say a class called employee, you have the name, age, ID, department. You write this POJO Java class. You put that as the method signature, one of the arguments in the method signature of your remote service. The GWT compiler will take care of generating the JavaScript compatible code from the client. And it will make sure of transferring the object serialization, deserialization using JSON format over the wire and transfer the object and get you back the result. So basically, you no more deal with the wire format and the complexities involved in creating and deserializing those formats. So this slide also shows you on the client side there are two modes of operation. On the first, we see a hosted mode. This is basically where your application runs as a Java application. The bytecodes runs in a JVM. This allows you to debug and to take advantage of the IDE support. This hosted mode actually emulates the entire browser mode for you, the real live browser mode for you, only with the additional capability of you being able to debug your application and you take advantage of the IDE support. So once your application is developed and you pass it through the GWT compiler, the GWT compiler generates the JavaScript components from your application. So basically the whole Java application components that you write with the libraries get transformed into JavaScript application components. This you can deploy in your production. And they work just as they would work with the hosted environment. Again, this is highly optimized, the JavaScript generated. Okay, so let's roll over the advantages of this approach, why we think GWT is the technical advantage. Yeah, so the first advantage we say is faster Ajax applications. So the code that you write would be faster than you write by hand. So let's basically look at this small method, which says on module load, I create a new button, I set text as boot. Now, we see that after a few compiler visitors, this code, the compiler visitors, basically your code in Java that you write goes through a series of compiler visits from the GWT compiler, which basically it starts by translating your code into JavaScript and then optimizing it over and over again. So after a few compiler visits, we see that the code gets transformed when running in IE6 into the DOM, the IE6 specific DOM implementation dot set inner text. This. After a few more compiler visitors, we see that the code gets transformed into something like this, which is the best optimized way of writing that particular piece of code. Now you could probably write this code in JavaScript if you're an expert. You could write this code, but then comes the problem of writing this specific code for every browser. When you write JavaScript, you have to deal with the issues of browser. I mean, you'll see some sites saying that best viewed in IE6, best viewed in Firefox this, IE6 plus this. GWT basically allows you to write your code, write the optimized code. It actually generates your optimized code when you write your code in Java. So you no more have to worry about browser quirks of supporting each platform. So the next slide we see is the optimization that it offers. So basically you keep on writing your UI classes, you keep on adding new functionality. Don't worry, GWT will optimize it for you. But that doesn't mean that you write inefficient algorithms or create a lot of redundant objects in the code. As long as you follow basic principles of programming, GWT will take care of optimizing your JavaScript. Also, it allows you to deal with CXS complexities and elaborate DOM constructs. We'll see some of the API, and we'll see how it helps you do that. Okay, so before we go further through the slides, I would like to show you what a GWT application looks like and what are the different components and how can we take the use of IDE support for developing these applications. Okay, so basically what you see is a Java project that has been created. Now Git ships with a few command line utilities. One of them is a project creator. One of them is an application creator. You just give the main module, it will generate a skeleton for you, for the app, and you just keep on adding your functionality to it. So let's see one of the applications that ships in default as a default sample with Git. It's called the mail application. You probably saw it at the keynote speech, but we'll go a bit more deeper into the different constructs in the code. Okay, so this is the main class that gets generated for you when you say my application is demo app. This is the main class that gets generated for you. Okay, before we actually look at the main class, let's look at the structure of the project. So we see there is a package called client, and there's a package client where we have the UI classes. Basically, this is where all your client-side code goes in. Whatever goes in here gets compiled into JavaScript. You can add more classes to the project, which basically can be your server-side components. If you're writing a Java server, if you're interacting with some other server, you can leave the project just about there. And then there is a folder, that's the main folder in Java, a namespace, where your main module files is. This is like a configuration file for a Git which defines a module. Now this configuration file for our main module looks something like this, where we say it inherits the Google user module. The entry point is this particular class, and the style sheet we're using is mail.css. The Git compiler would basically take in this information and run your main application by calling the entry point on that particular class. So this is our entry point to the application. Now if you see, this is Java code, right? You can use your favorite design patterns, you can use your favorite libraries. It makes use of Java API library available to you. This is Java programming. So I define mail as my main class, which basically implements an entry point. Entry point is an interface in one of the Google framework archives. And this basically allows you to override implement a method called onModuleLoad. This is what Git calls when your application bootstraps. And this is where basically you build your UI. So we say top panel.setWidth. We create a few panels here. We create a docking panel, enable scrolling CSS. And we can add command handlers like on window resize. So when a browser resize, how your layout of the components, how can you lay out the components again? So it's basically event-driven programming using Java UI classes. So when you actually create a component, a project, this will also create a couple of scripts for your project called the compile and shell. Compile will basically generate the JavaScript out of your code, Java code, and shell will basically run the hosted mode. Now let's see what a hosted mode is. So you see, basically this is the shell of the hosted mode, which basically has a console and logs in your, if there are some errors, it will show you the errors here. And this is the application running in a hosted browser mode. This is actually bytecodes running in a JVM. So you can actually add debug points in your code, and if you click say tasks, it will go and stop at the debug point where you can see the values of different variables in your code. So this is the advantage that Git offers while allowing you to code in Java. You can do kind of debugging, which is currently not possible with JavaScript, and the tools available with IDEs, the different JavaScript compilers and browsers. So there is something here called compile browse. Now, once you're done writing your application and testing your application, you can generate the JavaScript and actually see it running live on a browser. So Firefox being my default browser, it popped up the window in Firefox. And if you see the URL, this is localhost 888. Basically, there is an instance of Tomcat web server that runs locally in an embedded Tomcat server within the shell. And your application gets deployed here. If you have some server-side classes, they also get deployed here. And your application is linked to the server-side classes. So basically, you can debug end-to-end your application within the same ID, within the same shell. And this is the folder where the compiler, I'd actually pre-compiled the code. So this is the folder where the compiler generates your JavaScript and HTML files. I'll just open up a sample JS file. So the UI code that you saw earlier in the Java source file gets compiled into something like this. Highly obfuscated and extremely efficient, optimized, and reduced in size so that the network bandwidth, you can save network bandwidth and it transfers easily to the client. The client application boots up very quickly. Okay, so let's continue with the presentation. Okay, this is something called deferred binding that we recently introduced in GWT. What deferred binding, the concept behind deferred binding is why should you give something to your users that they don't really want? Say your user is a Polish user sitting in Poland and running Firefox. Why should he download as part of his application loading bootstrap process of a web application? Why should he download code that's written for IE, code that's written for say English language with all the message files? Why should we do that, right? If we can optimize that part, if we can defer the binding of the code to the actual runtime environment, it would be far more optimized, and it will lead to faster load up of your applications. So this is actually made possible using the technique of deferred binding. So the binding for your application, different bindings for your application are created and compile time, and depending on the runtime, the user agent that is being in use, say example, IE is being used in Polish locale. Depending on that particular environment, the necessary JS code would be transferred to the client, not all of the code. So basically, you don't go about writing if this is locale, is this, use this, if the browser agent is, use this. You don't write such code, and basically reduces the size of your JavaScript and faster network transfers. This basically illustrates the same thing. So when the single Java code base that we saw, our Eclipse project, is being compiled, the JavaScripts are being generated for each locale. You have this is the case when you're using the internationalization module of GWT. This will actually go ahead and compile. As a developer, you're only developing and dealing with the single Java code base. This is something that GWT does internally. The compiler of GWT does. It generates your code along with Firefox 1 and US bindings. It also generates a set against IE6 and UK bindings. It also generates a set for Safari and for Opera 9 for the different language bindings. Now, when the client actually asks for one particular file, we don't give all the cache HTMLs that you see around here. We just transfer what he needs. This is one of the optimizations that GWT offers you. So here's a code example of the same thing. there's an HTTP request. This is basically the GWT implementation of the underlying XML HTTP request, the XHR call. So in our GWT.xml, which is our module entry file that we saw earlier as for the mail project, in the same file we say if the type the first construct that you see basically says that this is the fall through rule. I mean, in case it is not IE6, what to do? Just keep the same class. In case it is IE6, I would like to defer the binding of HTTP request object to the IE6 specific implementations, which is native to IE6, which may do a faster job. So we say when property is name is user agent IE6, when type is this, replace with this class. This is something called deferred binding. So this basically helps you optimize your code. Okay, so the other, we'll move to the next advantage of GWT that we think it basically helps you skip the browser quirks. Now all browsers have different behaviors, even the same, different versions of the same browser behave very differently. So GWT allows you to code to an abstraction of a given widget. Say you're developing a UI and you want to write a pop-up web dialog. What GWT allows you is to just code to an abstraction. So you just say pop-up panel equal to new pop-up, and you say pop-up.center. Now GWT internally would take care of finding out the right implementation of the browser, finding out what code to generate, and will generate that optimized code.
So do you mean to say that deferred binding works at runtime?
So yes, the application bootstrap time, when you load it from the browser, that's when the deferred binding looks at the rules and delivers the right content to you. It generates the content for all the browsers and all the sets. The actual runtime, it decides what to throw to the browser.
Still, I need to have different implementation, right?
Yeah, so that's where you're defining your GWT.xml. If the IE6 implements that, like we saw in the example, you define the implementations in the XML file. This is just a process of optimizing. You can leave it open, and the GWT in that case would generate all the files and transfer it to the browser.
So that implementation translates to different set of Java code, where instead of doing branching line by line, I'm doing branching at a very high level.
Yeah, so the implementation actually transfers to different code in the JavaScript that the GWT compiler generates. In the Java, you just write that XML HTTP request simple object. While generating the JavaScript, the GWT compiler will check that if the IE6 is this, let me generate this specific implementation. And in the runtime, when the request is for the application bootstrap time, the request is from IE6 agent, it will just transfer that particular cache file to the client.
Can you optimize for a particular runtime?
I'm sorry?
Can you optimize for, say, Firefox or for?
So yes, so if the user is using Firefox browser, right? So we optimize to a particular implementation that is available in just Firefox and performs efficiently than what a normal, say the IE6 implementation does. So this is what deferred binding helps you in do. Otherwise, also, if you're not doing a deferred binding, all the files are not being transferred to the client, but then again, the code generated is specific to the particular implementation. So if a user loads up Firefox, only the code specific to Firefox would be running into the.
So you mean to say this deferred binding is done only at runtime, not at compile time?
So compile time is the GWT compile time, right? The GWT compiler, when it generates JavaScript, it generates appropriate bindings and decides at runtime which one to transfer to the client.
If I include deferred binding in my configuration, then the code for all the browsers is generated during compile.
The code for all browsers is generated.
Then it is shipped as part of your var, and then at runtime it is.
Yes, it decides which one to give to your browser client.
If I don't use that, it is generated only for IE.
No, it's generated for all the browsers, but the binding is not decided and it's transferred to the client. All the files are transferred to the client, and it may only use Firefox. So this is the process.
So there is a newer version of the browser that gets released.
Right.
So a newer version of a browser or a new browser like Chrome gets released.
Right.
We need to recompile, and there are specific optimizations in that browser that make.
Yes, so if a new targeted browser that's not currently in the list of target browsers, if you target a new browser, you generate the JavaScript files again and transfer them to the client. But you don't have to code again. You just have to compile them and package them.
Recompile the app and
Yes.
All this needs a lot of browser sniffing, I guess. I mean, when the client initially requests the URL, and does browser sniffing, it's not a really good idea to do sniffing.
I mean, if you, in your typical application, the first header that you try to look at is user agent, right? So it's something like that. If your client application, the application sitting on Google actually looks up that the user agent is IE6, let me just give this particular code to the client.
Is it like possible to put all the browser-specific fixes in one script? Like say, I don't want separate scripts for Firefox, separate scripts for IE, because that may lead
Yes, so that is
difficult.
that is the case before deferred binding. So if you're not using deferred binding, you have the scripts generated for your code.
It's for all the browsers.
Yes, it targets browsers that we saw in the first slide, the GWT target platform. It's actually the transfer of the specific files at runtime to the client. That's what deferred binding is helping you in. But it generates different binding at client.
So apart from this macro level of separating all these bindings, is there any way in which GWT separates it based on the availability of a function or availability of a browser object on the browser? So what you tell me is
Yes.
these are the user agent level, but the user agent may not be as granular as availability of objects.
Yes, so see, the typical case that an example I would like to give you is HTTP request object, right? So for IE you have the ActiveX object available. For Mozilla and Safari you have a different object available. So it's the same availability of the object that GWT decides and tries to generate the code.
How do you decide the availability? Is it based on the user agent string in the header, or is it you actually do the check for the availability of objects?
I think you're confusing between the compile time and the runtime, right? The compile time, the code is generated with if else. If this is a browser, let's do this. If this is a browser, let's do this. At the runtime, when it sees the browser is this, translates a particular object. The only difference is with deferred binding is that you specify a rule that if it is IE6, I just want this file. I want this particular implementation.
So basically, the way you determine a browser is based on the user agent string and not
Yes.
one more question. I assume that the optimization we're talking here, apart from setting the code, is basically the Ajax part of it, right? Basically, Ajax, in Ajax, we're trying to find out what type of browser we try to create the HTML.
See, it's not just the XHR object.
No,
even with the DOM API.
With context to deferred binding.
Yeah.
Is that what you're meaning?
So that's not the only example. There are other examples.
Yeah, I'm using extensively GWT, but I'm just trying to ask you.
So what's your exact question?
The optimization
Right.
with context to deferred binding is the XML HTTP object. That is what we are talking, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Is the DOM extension of JSON is written over JSON. Is the DOM is extension of JSON or is normal XML DOM?
So as we saw in the first slide, right? You're talking about the wire format, right? So if you're using you're open to your own implementation. You can use with XHR of GWT, that is the HTTP request object. You're open to use XML. You're open to use JSON. You're open to use whatever format you would like. But yes, yes. Any web server, any server side script, Python, Perl, Ruby, anything would do. It does not limit you from your server side. It's just that if you want to take advantage of the serialization and deserialization over JSON that's provided, if you have a Java web server, you can do that by implementing a particular remote service servlet in your Java side.
You have just shown the compiled script of the JavaScript script which comes out of the compiler. If something goes wrong there, like I'm a developer, how do I debug that script? It's all
Obfuscated. So there's a pretty flag that will generate pretty JavaScript. But then again, that's why we provide the hosted mode. That is the emulation of this mode.
So we have to debug on the hosted mode, not on the script actually.
There's no need to generate on the script because this is the entire emulation.
You are not expected to work on the generated.
So we say, see, it still allows you to use your favorite Firebug or whatever which you're running in the client. And there's also something related to this that will come up in a few slides later. I'll probably talk about it. The expectation is that basically you write Java code, you debug in Java with your IDE, and nothing goes wrong. We tell you nothing goes wrong.
Out of curiosity, what browser was that you opened in the...
That was Firefox.
So I mean, all three HTML, JS and CSS using this GWT.
Yeah.
What if I want to change some component, say HTML only? So I'll have to rewrite the,
You-
I'll have to modify in here itself.
Yeah, so you have a set of, you have your existing HTML, or if you have, you can just choose to write parts of code in GWT for your HTML, right? You have your existing HTML. If you want to modify the existing HTML, you can free to go ahead and modify the HTML file. So GWT actually plugs into specific points where you define, there is something called a slot, and we actually hook up into those slots. So if you want to decide the whole, design the whole UI using GWT, you can do that. If you have existing HTML code, you want to keep it, you can still keep it. Keep your existing JS, keep your existing CS. GWT will just hook up into the new functionality.
So you mean to say the user part will not be modified by the region, right?
No, the user HTML stays. I mean, if you have your existing HTML, it stays.
You were talking about which plugs into a particular.
Yes, the slot, right.
Slot. So you mean to say that the user written code will not be changed when I regenerate it again?
No, the user written code remains the same.
So can I generate HTML by using JavaScript? Say some
Yes.
some panel.
Yes, so there is DOM API available in GWT, and with the DOM API you can add new widgets. This will basically go and generate JavaScript that generates widgets for your DOM model. Okay, so let's move on with the presentation. Basically, one more advantage is no more memory leaks. Since you're developing in the controlled Java environment, you can always track your memory usage with the ID support. And this actually only works provided that you only code in GWT. Now, if you have your existing JavaScript code, GWT doesn't take guarantee that it does not leak memory. If you write the code in GWT, we would optimize and look for memory leaks and optimize your code in that particular sense. So if you're using the Disney interface, JavaScript native interface to talk to some existing JS, you can still run into a chance of having some memory leaks because of the interoperability with the existing Java code. So what we suggest is there is a very good article, DOM Events Memory Leak and You by Joel Weber. So you can go through that. If you're using Disney, this is what you can read and probably optimize your application. So the next advantage, so one of the classic problems with Ajax has been, okay, we'll take questions at the end, is that fine? Yeah. So the next advantage with GWT is history support. Now the classic problem with Ajax applications is history, right? When the applications were first written for Ajax and you're using the XHR, the browser nowhere knows that you're basically moving from an old resource to a new resource, because the URL remains the same. All you get is new data and refresh your whatever grids and tables you're painting on the screen. So GWT offers you history support through a project called RSH, Real Simple History. This is actually an open source project written by Brad Newberg, and it's present in the SVN Google Code repository. So it's basically a simple implementation. We have two panels, and we add a tab listener on a new tab being selected. We add that to the history item, and then we have a history listener from the browser listening for the events, and we see when the history has changed. We take the token, and then we select the tab. So basically going back in history. Now, the another advantage of GWT is code reusability. Now, when you write your Java applications, when you design your application in Java, you follow a lot of design patterns and programming practices. So basically, when you're writing your application in GWT, you are still free to go ahead and write code with your favorite design patterns. So we see the favorite gang of 4 patterns. Basically, we're calling it patterns here: observer, mediator, strategy, and the one we'd like to show you is called the composite pattern. Okay, so basically, let's take an example of designing UI components. Now, let's look at this, and then let's take a moment to think how or easy or difficult is it to write with JavaScript, which is better for you. So let's see. You write a UI component that is something like the contacts window that you see in Gmail, right? You click on the button on the left on the arrow, and basically opens up for you, and you can see your contacts. Similarly is the labels. Similarly, invite friends. So suppose your use case is to develop these 3 components. Let's see how we can apply design patterns to this and create reusable code. So the framework provides you with a class called Composite. This is basically a generic composite class. So we write something called, since we see that all these UI components are disclosure panels, so basically we write a generic abstract disclosure panel. And a specific implementation would be returned when you actually implement the method get disclosure panel. So the implementation classes for this particular panel that we see, those 3 classes would actually be returning the correct implementation. So So if you look at this particular code, which is the contact disclosure panel, we see that contact disclosure panel basically allows you to show a list of contacts. So all you do is create a vertical panel, get the profile of the user, you add some text, search, add, or invite, and then you return as the new disclosure panel. So basically you're seeing a composite design pattern in action here, and it allows you to actually reuse your code. So these panels can be reused further because you've developed it over a pattern. Similarly, for the label, we have a different implementation of the disclosure panel. Here we create a new disclosure panel with labels, and what we do actually in the constructor is we create a hyperlink and we add the hyperlink to the panel. So this is a different implementation, but with the same composite pattern. So yes, so in fact, GWT libraries or UI libraries like tab panel and caption and disclosure panel, they actually use a composite pattern themselves. Yeah, the other advantages that we already talked about, it's faster development when you actually have ID support available to you, when you have a debugging support available to you. You see the development time of the application reduces and there are lesser bugs, and even if there are bugs, you discover them quickly, and the debugging is much harder with JavaScript and CSS. So we already saw the demo of the application. Oh yes, so you can take advantage of features like code readability, code refactoring. Suppose you want to change you want to rename or move some object to a different hierarchy. Basically, you just use the ID support for it. You don't have to go about search replacing your JavaScript files and changing everything there. So with ID also comes the support of test cases. So you can write your standard JUnit test case. You can write a GWT test case provided in the library, or you can use Selenium test, whatever your favorite test strategy is, because all your code is Java. So you can test it using a lot of frameworks available for Java unit testing. Yeah, so this is something we're talking about. Debugging with hosted mode. We already saw that the hosted mode debugging. There's actually something called out-of-process debugging that's coming soon, where you would just need to install a plugin for the browser, and it would allow you to debug your live site. It's coming soon. It's not there yet. Yeah. So this will actually allow you out-of-process debugging. So you're no more in the JVM, you're actually in the browser. The plugin would allow you to reverse debug the code. So actually, the code is not yet released, right? So we just wait for it. It's just a kind of a information thing. Sorry, not allowed to disclose dates here, but soon. EJBs on the server side. Yes, so basically the option is available to you when you're using a Java server. GWT remote services can just be used as a gateway. You're free to implement any kind of server-side framework, Spring, Hibernate, JSF, EJBs, whatever you're comfortable with, you can go ahead with it. The remote service is just a gateway to this thing so that you can leverage the capability of JSON deserialization. So the services can be written. It could be anything. It could be a EJB, it could be a POJO service, it could be. Yes. So that's the server-side implementation. So we're basically looking at more at client-side, although server-side is available to you just for the deserialization part. Now you could use JDBC directly within your remote service classes, or you could write your own server-side implementations for your services.
This out-of-process you're working on top of the current feature that is available.
This will actually be a plugin for the browsers, for all the browsers that you can target your application. So yes, to summarize the advantages, we again see optimize high performance applications, browser quirks, headaches, not a part of developers, memory leaks taken care of and history support added, code reuse through design patterns, faster development using IDs and other Java tools, and debugging in bytecode, which allows you to basically be more productive. So what's new in 1.5, Java 5 support. Now you have the libraries of Java 5 available to you, so generics and all is available to you. So you can basically write your UI using those stuff. Easier interop with JavaScript using JSO overlays. The earlier the JSO was used internally by GWT for its implementation, but now you can write JSO overlays and interact in a more native fashion with existing JavaScript. Enhanced DOM class for full specification compliance and better application performance. So the you can see application performance of up to 20% to 200% with your existing applications. If you're written in GWT, you just compile it with 1.5, you can see that much boost in your application performance. So this is the resource. This is a URL code.google.web.toolkit. This is where the SDKs are available for you for Linux, Mac, and Windows. And this is where all the links for user community and sample applications and tutorials articles are present. Yes, we saw a demo today by Prasad, right? Were you there for the keynote? Yeah, so that application is a real good app. There are, in fact,
something where it is in production and people are actually having a lot of hits.
Yeah, so I came across a social app called Typeracer in Orkut. That's actually a good application.
Is it really good for websites or for web apps? Web apps is like a calculator on the browser, and a website is like a full-blown Yelp.com or something.
Yeah, so basically it allows you to
Like if CSS is a pain for me, right?
Yeah.
I don't really write good CSS, so can GWT help me in that case?
so
JavaScript is not a problem.
so basically when you have your CSS file, I mean, is that the pain?
Yeah, I mean, can GWT help me lay out the stuff? Like
Yes, so once you have your CSS file, you can add these CSS classes to your widgets using just say widget.setStyle and give the class name. That's all you have to do. So it's very like you have some style available to you, but yeah, you should have your CSS imported as part of the GWT module. Yes, yes, you can use existing CSS. Can we take one by one with the mic, please?
You said 1.5 GWT uses Java 5.
Yeah.
So it never uses the complete API of Java.
See, there are some limitations that are available on the GWT side. The whole Java API is not available. I mean, I think even servlets are part of the 1.5 SDK now.
No,
Right.
HTML is not available.
So yeah, there are some limitations that are listed on the GWT side. So those are still those still apply.
And coming to the memory leaks, normal JavaScript, Ajax application, everyone knows that with time, the browser performance goes down because of memory leaks and accumulation of your objects. And because browsers, they do this garbage collection by reference counting.
Right.
And how is it that GWT is implementing it? Because at the end of the day, it's JavaScript.
Yeah, so it generates optimized JavaScript for you. It makes sure that what it is generating is actually not generating any kind of leaks or basically not differencing objects or basically not creating unnecessary objects for which you would typically create a XML HTTP object and may leave it hanging in your code, right, as a globe. So those kind of things it takes optimizations
Is
for.
it that anything that's detached from the root object of a GWT, it just throws it out?
Anything that's detached from GWT, that's your
Yeah,
existing
the root
code.
object, the first root object that we load at the entry point class.
Right, so apart from whatever is already there is there, GWT doesn't optimize that part. So you have memory leaks there, you need to optimize it directly. What you write in GWT, GWT optimizes.
And one more thing that I faced using GWT was, if you, I mean, on IE, the panel show differently, and on a Mozilla it shows up differently. It's, forget about the CSS or anything, you don't have any CSS, but the way it's laid out, it's totally different.
How do you fix that?
Yeah, so
The alignment itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one stands here, the other one stands.
but it may possibly be a bug, so you can probably go to code.google.com and raise a bug for this thing. I mean, it may be a bug, yeah.
Even with Chrome, the alignment is different.
Yeah, Chrome is new. We are reaching full compliance. So.
I use decorated tab panel. So can I change the color of that border and make it more rounded, like that customization? Can I do?
Yes, you use CSS for that.
Okay.
I mean, decoration and all, UI decoration and all is CSS. So.
Hi.
Typically, how does Java inheritance directly go to prototypal inheritance, or what kind of things do you do?
I'm sorry, I do not have answer to the internal stuff right now, but you can post a question at the groups.
Another question on closures. So how exactly is, I mean, as a JavaScript developer, I've always been used to closures. Does Java reflection come any close to the way JavaScript closures are? I mean, do Java reflections become JavaScript closures on GWT?
No, so it's like, I mean, if I give an example of XML HTTP request objects, you have async handlers. So these async handlers are they handle the server-side requests, and you can implement your on fail or on success such stuff. So you have callbacks.
It's not about simple closures like that. It's about referencing objects using string names. So in Java we can only do object.property.
Right.
JavaScript has this advantage of object in brackets. We can have dynamic property names.
So basically, when
things like that.
Yeah. So what you have in Java is just available to you. I mean, if you want to write such stuff, you're free to go and write that in JS and use JSNI to interoperate.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. The GWT HTML search engine.
Can you speak
compatible?
a bit? Can you speak a bit more clearly?
Can I make the HTML search engine compatible?
I'm sorry, I didn't get you again.
The HTML coming out of the GWT, is it search engine compatible?
You can write the HTML and just hook in GWT at the entry point where you want. You have still your meta tags and whatever available to you. No, I don't. No plans here. We think Java is a very good language to go ahead.
What are some of the challenges that you have faced when it's production?
You mean Java to JavaScript? Yeah, so what we're constantly working is on optimizing. I mean, we want the code to be optimized for every particular browser, every particular environment. So these are the challenges we work on. And of course, achieving full DOM compliance and stuff like that. That's something we work on.
For more adoption, is there a plan to take existing HTML, CSS, JavaScript and get Java and come back going forward? Start using it.
No,
The problem is movement of existing tools, because you say there is a phase movement where you can start using some parts
Yeah.
as GWT,
right.
but the existing big applications, right?
I don't think there is.
You will get back Java code and start using that going forward. I'll get
Yeah.
off this code as well.
I don't think there is a plan for anti-cross compiler to back to. Yeah. But it's a quite interesting idea.
Does the roadmap also have Flash, pseudo-Flash support? So typically things like cross-domain requests can be achieved using Flash. So that things like jQuery, YUI are doing it. File uploads and
So
is it on the GWT?
so actually there was a presentation in Google I/O that's present on YouTube. If you go to code.google.com, you can go to that link. It's on timepedia.org blog. So it's a very nice presentation that basically shows how GWT can be extended to use Flash, to integrate with Android and stuff. So you can.
This is about components. So using jQuery and YUI, today I can do cross-domain Ajax requests.
Right.
And that kind of embeds a small script file. So are you guys also looking to planning to go in that direction?
See, it provides what browser is capable of. So you can still go ahead and write Flash components in your HTML, and you can. I mean,
So I don't have to write it in jQuery. jQuery gives it as a library to
you can use jQuery. You can use jQuery with your HTML. No, so it's good.
GWT is not really looking into that.
Actually, there is a jQuery implementation. That's the same blog if you go to, and there is a YouTube video. There's a big presentation that happened on Google I/O in month of May. So there's a fair bit detail about that.
Complete jQuery has been implemented.
This is actually not. This is open source contributions. It's actually not happening. So thanks. Yeah. See, that's really your server-side implementation, right? Now, you choose your favorite IDE. You add your connectors here. You add your web XML here. If you are using a data source from JNDI source or something, you just progress the way you would write normal stuff. It's just that GWT gives you a gateway with the JSON serialization, deserialization flow. Everything else remains the same. GWT doesn't tell you how to write database. GWT doesn't tell you how to write your server-side classes. It's just that you can leverage the JSON serialization, deserialization format so that you don't have to struggle with deciding the wire format and transporting objects across by giving you a remote service servlet. Basically, your servlet should extend this particular servlet from framework and everything gets deserialized. That's the only thing. And it's also optional. You can have a Java server not using JSON.
We have to configure that part. We have to configure that.
I mean, you write your application as you would write any other Java application, right? So if you want to add a data source, you create a data source in your web server, and then you go and reference that, do a lookup in your code, and you proceed as you do. I mean, it's not, GWT doesn't handle data sources and database connections. No.
I have a specific question on one of the panels, flex table. Does GWT provide expandable columns kind of a feature? Draggable columns or else, I mean.
There's actually, well, I'm not sure if this is one of the widgets with GWT, but there is actually a project GWT EXT which has a set of
but that's not Apache license, so can't use it for commercial.
Yeah, so maybe you can post in the groups and you'll get an answer. I do not know the specific answer if that widget is available or
because
not.
EXT does have lots of features,
yes,
but
I know
it's not Apache license.
Yes, so maybe there are actually a couple of other library widget contributors also. It's not just GWT EXT. So maybe if you go ahead with the community, and you would probably get responses. People who have actually developed these components and open source them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you.